Greetings, friends. Today we have seen the passing of Queen Elizabeth II and how the new monarch has ascended the throne, King Charles III. And so there is a lot of profound history on the ruling monarch and their ancestry. And if you should trace back to the first Anglo-Saxon monarch or king, coming down to our modern day, it's filled with so much history, so much things to consider, to learn from, and to gather much information for the future. And so some of it is filled with awe as we consider the rich tradition and history. Some is filled with lessons of horror, some with greed, and some with religious interference. And the list would go on and on. So let us see if we can look at a few noteworthy historical events in the British monarch. There are some aspect of the history that is being less focused on. And that's the part that we want to look at. But let us do a recapping of some important things to even note before we look at the part that is least talked about, even when we hear about the talk of reparations and so on. And so of the now 67 monarch, 8 have been women. And so of those 8 queens, we have the first Matilda, who ruled from 1141 to 1148. Then we had Queen Jane, who only ruled for 9 days in 1553 in July, only 9 days. Then we have the third queen in the history of all the monarchs, Mary the First, who ruled 1553 to 1558. And then we also have Elizabeth the First from 1558 to 1603. Then Mary the Second, 1689 to 1694. And Queen Anne, 1702 to 1707. And Queen Victoria, the second longest ruling monarch, from 1837 to 1901. And then we have Queen Elizabeth II from 1952 to 2022. And so those are the 8 of the 67 monarchs who would have ruled on the throne, the British throne. So Queen Elizabeth, the 8th of the complete ruling queen monarchs. Let's look at the history of how she ascended the throne, and then we go back on a forgotten history. And so we would have learned that when Queen Victoria died, history would have told us that King George VI of Great Britain and Northern Ireland would have ascended the throne. And when he ascended the throne, he ruled until died on February 6, 1952, after a long illness. But King George VI had two daughters, Queen Elizabeth and Margaret. But Queen Elizabeth would be the one who won the heart of the British people. Even that speech that she gave during World War II, where she actually spoke on the radio and comforting the children who would have been separated, and even other persons who would have to be separated from their comfort, and children would have to be separated from their parents. And she gave an emotional speech how she used to be separated, the idea of being separated. She was acquainted and familiar with it, and she sympathized with those who had to do and face such situation. And from then on, it won the heart of the British people. And she'd also stayed during the war. She stayed in England while many went to other countries and went to other places to seek refuge for a time. And she grew into a young lady that was winning the hearts of all those who would come in contact with her. And then when King George VI would have died on February 6, 1952, when he had died, even before she had won the heart of the British people, it never was supposed to immediately happen like that, as though it happened, that Queen Elizabeth became queen. It's difficult to imagine a world without the same royal family we know and love. But if it weren't for King Edward VII unexpectedly abdicating the throne in 1936, because when he ascended the throne after Queen Victoria died, he had a mistress that he loved that was a divorcee from America, Wallis Simpson. She was a divorcee from America. And so he received a lot of backlash, the king, for wanting to marry a divorcee. So there was a lot of public outcry, and even from the church. And so in 1936, he voluntarily bowed under the pressure and gave up the throne to his younger brother, King George VI. And so King George VI would have ruled until then and died on February 6, 1952, after a long illness. King George VI of Great Britain and Northern Ireland dies in his sleep at the royal estate at Sandringham. And then Princess Elizabeth, the older of the two king's daughters, and next in line to succeed him. She was in Kenya at the time when she learned of the news of his father's death. And she was officially crowned Queen Elizabeth II on July 2nd, 1953, at the age of 27. And so we see how Queen Elizabeth ascended the throne. Maybe if it has gone the other way, that the king never abandoned his throne, maybe we would have a different family lineage of kings or royal family. But we see how it all turns out. And so that's how we would have reached to the point today of where Queen Elizabeth would have been the longest ruling monarch. There is something I want us to go back and look at in history that is very disturbing, and that we should also learn some lessons from these historical events. And you may say, what is that? Violence was commonplace and persecution frequent for followers whose faith differed from that of the reigning monarch, English Catholic. Reformers and early church leaders were persecuted in the first centuries of the Reformation. Why am I saying this? If you do a study of the kings, the monarchs, and queens who have ascended the throne, you would realize that many were vassal kings, puppet kings of the papacy, the Pope. And many acts they did were in accordance with what the papacy would have them do. But there were a few who decided that they would have taken no orders, or they would not follow in the footsteps of church and state, or the Catholic Church, the papacy, controlling the monarch. And there are some characters that we want to look at. There are some things that we want to look at in the history of the British monarch, the interdict, the papal bull, the glorious revolution, the wars of the three kings, the Act of Settlement of 1701, the Gunpowder Plot, Guy Fawkes Day. We want to look at these things that are very important to our time today. The Pope, the Catholic, controlling the monarch of England and using them and many other nations to do their biddings and their work. And so we see that it would have started in about 595 when Pope Gregory I sent a missionary, now known as the Gregorian mission to the kingdom of Kent. And one named Augustine became the first Archbishop of Canterbury in Cairo, 597. During the Middle Ages and until the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Scotland were Catholic kingdoms with diplomatic relationship with the Papal States. And what is the Gregorian mission? What is the Gregorian mission? Because in 595, Pope Gregory had a Gregorian mission, also called the Augustinian mission. It was a Christian mission sent by the Pope Gregory, in 595-596 to convert Britain's Anglo-Saxons. It was a mission headed by Augustine of Canterbury. And the goal was to convert England to Catholicism. And all sorts of means were used throughout the history. Throughout the history of England, you would have realized that all sorts of means was used to convert England to popery. And there are many lessons for us to learn in this rich history. And even today, these persons, we see them and they're called apostolic Nuncian. They are all over the world that they are sent by the Vatican. It's a top level diplomatic mission. Persons called Nuncian, Nuncio. Even in Jamaica, all over the world, in the Caribbean, in Asia, Europe, South America, Africa, all over the world. So from way back then, even in England, these Gregorian mission, these persons were sent by the Catholic, and they had an official, or whether it's official or not, they played a role as an ambassador or a diplomat for the papacy. That even in 1209 AD, Pope Innocent III put the Kingdom of England under interdict. Amidst rising dispute with John, King of England, after he refused to accept Stephen Lawton, the papal candidate for the Bishop of Canterbury. And so Pope Innocent III had wanted to make Stephen the Bishop of Canterbury. He wanted to choose this person and put him in the office. But the king would have none of it. And so the king was interdict. What does it mean to interdict? In Catholic canon law, an interdict is an ecclesiastical censure or a ban that prohibits persons or certain active church individuals or group from participating in certain rites, or that the rites and the services of the church are banished from having a validity in certain territories for a limited or extended time. So when the king was interdict, he was being banned. So some of those bans would mean that he cannot participate in the so-called Holy Mass. He couldn't do this or do that concerning the church or participate in worship. He was censored because the king had wanted to interfere in the religious affair of England. That's in 1209 AD, Pope Innocent III. He put the kingdom of England under interdict because he had a dispute with the King of England, John, after he refused to accept Stephen Lawton, the papal candidate for Bishop of Canterbury. The dispute was resolved in 1213 when John conceded power to the Pope by becoming his vassal and agreed to pay feudal taxes to the Catholic Church. So the Pope won the dispute in 1213 because John conceded and wanted to become what? His vassal. What's vassal? Vassal is like a puppet. One who is like a holder of a land by feudal tenure on conditions of homage and allegiance. So it's like a steward. He become a vassal, a person or a country in a subordinate position to another. That's what it means to be a vassal. He was saying that, "O Pope, I am now being your vassal. I'm now your puppet king, being subordinate to you, my kingdom and myself." And so the Pope won the dispute. So a lot of the kings in England, in France, in Spain, in Netherlands, a lot of these European nations, they were controlled and they were just vassal king. So when we see slavery and all of these things, we should know that the root of it was popery. When we see many lives that have been lost because of religion or Christianity, so-called false Christianity, the root of it traced back, according to the history, to the doorsteps of Rome. We also see in 1479, Edward IV of England appointed John Sherwood as the first resident ambassador in the Papal States. Diplomatic relationships were broken in 1536, following the establishment of the Anglican Church by Henry VIII. Diplomatic relationships were reestablished in 1553 under Bloody Mary, and we're going to do a part on her, Bloody Mary of England, who appointed Sir Edward Corney as her ambassador during the reign of Elizabeth I. During the reign of Elizabeth I, diplomatic relations were broken again due to the papal bull, Regnans in Excelsis, in 1570. And so we see that there was a diplomatic relationship, and then it was broken. It says in 1479, according to the history, Edward of England appointed John Sherwood as the first resident ambassador in the Papal States. It says that diplomatic relationships were discontinued. But it says that under Bloody Mary, and we're going to look at her a little from now, Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary wanted to bring back England under the control of Catholicism, Popery. She had wanted to bring back England under the control. And so we see that even when Queen Elizabeth I came on the scene, we see that she didn't wanted to have a diplomatic relationship with the papacy on their terms. And what happened is that there was a papal bull in 1570. What's a papal bull, you may ask? And so because Queen Elizabeth I did not want to bring England under the control of the papacy passed a papal bull. What's a papal bull? A papal bull is a type of public decree, letters, patent, or a charter issued by a pope of the Catholic Church. And so what was this letter? What was this papal bull that was issued by the Catholic Church to the Queen of England? This papal bull, as you are seeing it, the name of it on the screen, it's called Reigning on High. So the papal bull that Pope Pius V issued on the 25th of February 1570 AD, it excommunicated Queen Elizabeth I of England, referring to her as the pretended Queen of England and the servant of crime. So the papacy says that Queen Elizabeth is a servant of crime and declared her a heretic and released her subjects from alliance to her. It was even said that anyone who would seek to rescue the throne from her by killing her or whatsoever means, they would receive no penalty of sin. They would be free from sin. And that's the length that Pope went. And they tried a dozen times or more to kill Queen Elizabeth I. But God would have protected her. And if you listen to our series Fire Upon Rome, where we mention and show the history of it, the papal bull declared her a heretic and released her subjects from allegiance. So the papal bull was saying to the people, don't obey Queen Elizabeth I. She's an heretic. She doesn't support the Catholic faith. She doesn't believe in popery and support popery wholeheartedly. And anyone who disobeys her is free from all charges. Even those who had sworn oath to her and excommunicated any who obeyed her orders. So anybody who obeyed her will be excommunicated. We charge and command all, and singularly the nobles, subjects, peoples, and others afore, say that they do not dare obey her orders. Don't obey her. Don't obey her mandates and laws, else you will be excommunicated. And in those times, people were so afraid of being excommunicated. What does that mean? That would mean like you're being expelled, removed from membership from the church of the Roman Catholic Church. And so the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope was seen as a god. And so persons would obey what they say, as how people would obey what God would have said, because they had looked upon the Pope as God. They even went as far to say those who shall act to the contrary, we include in the like sentence of excommunication. So what were the offenses that they were charging Queen Elizabeth I for? What are those alleged offenses? Some were as follows: that she has removed the royal council, composed of the nobility of England, and has filled it with obscure men. So these men were not Catholics. They were heretics. They oppressed the followers of the Catholic faith. And so popery wanted to fill the important offices and want them to be filled by Catholics. She was also charged and accused of instituted false preachers and ministers of impiety, abolished the sacrifice of the Mass, prayers, fast, choice of meats, celibacy, and Catholic ceremonies. And the charges went on, and has ordered that books of manifestly heretical content be propounded to the whole realm. So what the Catholics were saying is that the Queen should have banned books that do not go in accordance with the Catholic faith. But she allowed them to circulate. And she abolished the Mass, the Catholic Mass, celibacy, Catholic ceremonies. And she allowed books that speak against the Catholic faith to continue to spread in the whole realm. And that impious rites and institution after the rule of Calvin, entertained and observed by herself, be also observed by her subjects. And so what the reformer Calvin taught and teach, the Pope accused Queen Elizabeth I of participating and encouraging others to do so. So would you realize that there was a lot of tug and war between the monarchs of England and the papacy? The papacy wanted to control, and they have controlled the throne of England for a large portion. Even we see in 1621, the English court dispatched George Gage to the papal court in order to obtain permission for Charles I of England to marry the Spanish Infanta, a marriage that in the event did not take place. But when Charles I married a French Catholic princess named Henrietta Maria, he obtained the blessing of Pope Gregory, who used the opportunity to dispatch Gregorio Panzani to England as his envoy, and Panzani was followed as papal envoy by the Scottish Franciscan George Conn. And so many of the kings would seek authority from the papacy to marry and even to divorce. They seek permission because many of the kings, they were puppet kings. And they never just acted on their own, many of them. It's a fascinating history when you really look at it. But let's jump a bit further on another character. In even 1686, King James VII of Scotland, not the King James who gave the permission for the translation of the Bible in English, not that one. In 1686, King James VII of Scotland and the second of England dispatched as envoy to the papal state the Earl of Castlemaine and received as papal envoy Count Fernando de Hada. Relationships were broken again following the Glorious Revolution in 1688. So there was a diplomatic relationship between King James VII. So he was referred to as King James VII of Scotland and King James II of England. But the diplomatic relationship breakdown between the papacy and King James VII. And it says that what followed was what? The Glorious Revolution in 1688. What is the Glorious Revolution? We want to look at that. The papal state recognized James Francis Edward Stewart as James VII, James VIII, and the third until his death in 1766, but not his son Charles, which gave subtle recognition to the reigning house of Hanover. This helped start the reform of the anti-Catholic penal laws, achieved in part by the Quebec Act and the Papist Act of 1778. Sir John Cox Episley brief mission to Rome to explore the possibility of restoring relationships failed in 1779 to 1780. So what was the Glorious Revolution? What was the Glorious Revolution? The Glorious Revolution was the disposition in November 1688 of James II, who is also known as James VII, King of England and Scotland and Ireland, and his replacement by his daughter Mary II and her husband William III of Orange, and stadtholder and de facto ruler of the Dutch Republic. And so what had happened is that the papacy dispose or take down for the Glorious Revolution. It was when the papacy seek to take down King James II and the Seventh from being king. And so the popes were so powerful. Despite his Catholicism, James became king in February 1685 with widespread support, for many feared that his exclusion would lead to a repetition of the 1639 to 1651 Wars of the Three Kingdoms. So you can do some research on the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. Over the next 3 years, he alienated his supporters by suspending the Scottish and English Parliament in 1685 and ruling by personal decree. Despite this, it was considered a short-term issue, for James was 52, and given that his second marriage was childless after 11 years, the heir presumptive was his Protestant elder daughter, Mary. And so a lot of issue was brewing and spreading, and steam were building. Why? What was happening in England? Because we see that the Catholics, the Pope, they were trying to do all sorts of things to get England to turn upside down if they would not do as what they want them to do. And so that's what we see happening. In the book, The Origins of Catholic Nationalism, Part 8, Volume 3, page 15 to 18, in the History of Irish Catholicism, 1967, it says, at the request of the Jesuits and to relieve the pressure on Catholics in England, Pope Gregory issued a clarification or suspension in 1580, explaining that Catholics should obey the Queen outwardly in all civil matters until such a time as suitable opportunity presents itself for her overthrow. And so that was a quote that I should have read while we were looking at Queen Elizabeth I. At the request of the Jesuits, so the Jesuits, the black pope, was saying to the white pope, so the one who wears the black, the head of the Jesuits, the black pope, was saying to the white pope, the one that wears the white, the one that is in the public, The black pope influenced the white pope, saying what? That to relieve the pressure. Why? At the request of the Jesuits, and to relieve the pressure on Catholics in England, Pope Gregory issued a clarification or suspension in 1580, explaining that Catholics should obey the Queen outwardly in all civil matters until such a time as suitable opportunity present itself for her overthrow. So because the papal bull that he had issued was calling all to disobey the Queen, and it was now backfiring and affecting the Catholics in England, he was now trying to, simmer down the issue somewhat, trying to sound as if that he's changing his stand, but he's not. He wasn't. He wasn't. He was only doing it for his own purposes, so that the Catholics would not have gotten discouraged, and the Catholics would not also turn away from the papacy or giving up popery because of the pressure that they were now facing. And so the Jesuits advised Pope Gregory to do as such. But he says at the suitable time. And what I want us to do is to do a research on the suppression of the Jesuit order. Suppression of the Jesuit order, or expulsion of the Jesuit order. And you would have realized that's why we have the rise of a Protestant nations called America right after. Else the papacy would have destroyed such Republican nation. Destroy it. But their power was being weakened all over Europe. All over. They were being expelled from all over. And the order had almost been banned. Even the gunpowder plot. But before we look at the gunpowder plot, let's look a bit even at Queen Mary, Bloody Mary. She killed so many Protestants. About 200 or more Protestants she killed in her short reign. Her aim was to restore back England under the control of popery. And then she was called Bloody Mary. But the gunpowder plot that is celebrated even in England, even to this day, Guy Fawkes Day. What was the gunpowder plot? The plan was to blow up the House of Lords during the state opening of Parliament on the 5th of November 1605. Why? Why? Why had they wanted to blow up the Parliament? King James would have given authorization to the reformers to make a translation of the scripture in their own language. the English language. Let the people have a Bible in their own language. Because from about 22 into Los, it was banned and forbidden for the common man to have a Bible. Only the priests and these persons would have access to it to read and tell you what they want to tell you. And the reformers wanted to give the people a Bible in their own language that they could read for themselves. And King James, all he did was to authorize and give permission to the reformers to undertake the work. He wasn't the one who went and do the translation. Oh no, as some people think. He only authorized them to do it. And so the gunpowder plot was while Parliament was about to begin. Guy Fawkes, who had over 10 years of military experience fighting in the Spanish Netherlands, he was given charge of explosive gunpowder to put around the Parliament and to light it when King James and all his men would have assembled. The plot was revealed to the authorities in an anonymous letter sent to William Parker on the 26th of October 1605 during a search of the House of Lords in the evening on the 4th of November 1605. Guy Fawkes was discovered guarding 36 barrels of gunpowder, enough to reduce the House of Lords to rubber, and he was arrested. Most of the conspirators fled from London and went to various places as they learned that the plot had been discovered. They fled. And several made a stand against the pursuing sheriff of Worcester and his men at Olbeck House in an ensuing battle. And so, at the trial in January 27, 1606, 8 of the survivors, include Guy Fawkes, were convicted and sentenced to be drawn and quartered. This was a statutory penalty for men convicted of high treason in the Kingdom of England. And so it was a serious punishment. That's why even today we have the celebration on the 5th of November, Guy Fawkes Night or Day, also known as Guy Fawkes Day, or Bonfire Night and Fireworks Night, is an annual commemoration observed on the 5th of November in England. I remember I asked someone who lived in England if they are aware of Guy Fawkes Day or the meaning behind it, and the person wasn't aware. But on the 5th of November, primarily in Great Britain, it is an historical celebration that goes back from 1605, when Guy Fawkes, a member of the gunpowder plot, was arrested they found out that it was a Catholic plot intended to assassinate the Protestant King James I. So the Catholic Church had wanted to assassinate him as how they wanted to assassinate Queen Elizabeth I. But the king had survived, and the people lit bonfires around London, and months later, the observance of the 5th of November Act enforced an annual public day of thanksgiving for the plot's failure. Amen. Amen. God would have foiled that plot. He would have foiled it because King James had a work to do in supporting and encouraging the reformers in whatsoever way to do the translation of the Bible in English. So from there on, within a few decades, even until now, the Gunpowder Treason Day is known and celebrated and became a predominant English state commemoration as it carries strong Protestant religious overtone. It also became a focus for anti-Catholic sentiment. And so popery was behind the Guy Fawkes Day or Gunpowder Plot. And so even if you look at the Act of Settlement of 1701, the Act of Settlement of 1701, it's one that should teach you a lesson that whenever church and state comes together, it will only cause chaos, problems, persecution, and religious intolerance. And so the Act of Settlement of 1701 was a law that was passed that says no Catholic should become king. Only legitimate children, no spouses, and only predominantly mainly males, especially those who are firstborn males, should have the right, even over women. And so that was the Act of 1701. But you should ask yourself, why this act would state no Catholic? Because if you look at all the history of England, there's even more that we could go on and make mention of. Even the Spanish Armada that we could have touched on. Many other things that we could touch on. But you should ask yourself why the Act of Settlement of 1701 would forbid Catholics from becoming king or queen. Or even they went as far to say that if a person should assume the office of a king or queen and he or she marries a Catholic, that person should not be considered eligible. Why? Why was this anti-Catholic tone? Because all the history of the Catholic and the Pope, infiltration, trying to control the government, the monarch, trying to control the religious affair, it only spreads and breeds violence, persecution, religious intolerance, banned on everything that goes against their teaching, and it only breeds a fire of chaos, problem, crosses, and destruction persecution, it brings within its train all sort of disaster. And we today should learn from that there should not be a mixing of church and state. We should learn from the history of England while persons are seeking and reflecting on the royal family during this time. We should learn the lesson. We should learn the history from popery, that popery should never be in control of any government or any religious affairs, because the history would have teaches us what the fruit of it brings. And even in the future, even now, but we have seen that the act was amended. It was amended in 2013. The Succession to the Crown Act of 2013 also established that an heir could still inherit the throne even if they married a Roman Catholic, and no longer requires heirs outside of the first 6 in the line of succession to seek the ruling monarch's permission to marry. And so the act was amended. The Act of Settlement of 1701 was amended in 2013. And the one about no Catholics, it was amended to say that no Catholic should be a monarch. But if the person who is being elected to the office marries someone who is a Catholic, that person should be considered eligible, because the Act of 1701 says that person could not be eligible to succeed the throne. So the new law officially took effect in 2015. However, the ban against heirs who are Roman Catholic at least remains officially. And so what was also changed also is also the act where it gives preference to male, and it makes male and female equal. That was the only thing that was amended. And so why would there still be? Why would they have a law such as this? It should teach us. What are the influence of presently now of Catholics even on the present monarch? Because they would have learned from the expulsion, they would have learned from the history how to not work and how to work, but they are still working. The Jesuits, they are still working. Their whole goal is to destroy Protestantism and to re-establish papal supremacy. And they have done their job. They have done it, because there is hardly a single church that you can think of that is consistently, publicly protesting. Some claim that they're Protestant, but you are not hearing it and seeing it. And Protestantism had died, but there are still faithful few who are protesting, because Revelation 13, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we will do a study on that to show that the Antichrist, the man of sin, is the papacy. And so what is going on today? So let's look, what are they doing today? What are the Catholics trying to accomplish today with their diplomatic relationship with England? On the 9th of September 2011, Ambassador Nigel Marcus Baker presented his credentials to Pope Benedict XVI. In his speech, the British ambassador presented 3 main goals of Vatican UK relations, namely facing existential threats such as climate change. So what will they be working on? Uniting together to work on climate change. The threat against climate change and nuclear proliferation, promoting what? Interfaith dialogue to achieve peace and to work to reduce world poverty. All these sounds good, but it will bring back England under the dark days of Bloody Mary and under the dark days of many of the monarchs who were being vassal, puppet kings of Rome, because climate change will be the vehicle that they will use to persecute and to bring about a mark of the beast crisis. And so in Matthew 24, Jesus says that we are to look up when we see the climate change is changing around us. Floods, water, signs in the sun and the moon, all these things, wars and rumors of war. Jesus says we are to look up. But the man of sin and these puppet kings in the world today, they are saying that we are to look down on earth for a solution. Look towards the papacy. Look to their solution. But do not be deceived, as Jesus warns in Matthew 24. He warns, let no man deceive you. If you forget your past history, you will repeat it. And so we see this interfaith dialogue in the United Nations. We see this climate change agenda being pushed. And if you look at the video that we did on climate change, Elijah and the last day, you will see that these things will lead to the mark of the beast crisis. Are you prepared? Will you learn from your history that there should be a separation from popery? Because popery's goal in history was to ban everything that goes against their faith and goes against their teaching. They were not for religious tolerance, but only for popish tolerance. And so we must learn from our past so that we do not repeat it. And so may God have mercy. May the love of Jesus burn within our hearts. May we give him our all, as he has died to save us and to set us free. Only as it says in John 8 and verse 32. And only as the love of God is shed abroad in our heart. May God have mercy. Amen.